On Question Time from London tonight, Social Security Secretary Harriet Harman, Shadow Foreign Secretary Michael Howard, Liberal Democrat Foreign Affairs spokesman Ming Campbell, and journalist and feminist Beatrice Campbell. Hello, welcome to Question Time. In answer to the obvious first question, the two Campbells are sitting side by side, but they're not related. Over the next hour, we have question and argument here. The panel don't know the questions that are going to be put to them. Let's have the first question straight away, which comes from Michael Green, who is a consultant agriculturalist. Mr. Green.
In view of today's unexpected and unwelcome rise in interest rate, should the Bank of England be allowed to be in total control?
7.5% it's gone to. Michael Howard?
No, I don't think the Bank of England should be in total control. I think that the management of interest rates is a key part of the management of the economy, and it's one of the main things which governments are elected to do. So I think governments ought to accept their responsibility for setting interest rates, and I think it was a great mistake to hand that responsibility over to the Bank of England. Of course, the Chancellor of the Exchequer must bear a great share of the responsibility for the increase in interest rates, because so far from doing what he should have done, which is to take action to encourage saving since the election, in fact, he's attacked saving, he's attacked pensions, he's attacked PEPs and TESAs, and that has contributed to the fact that people have spent their money, and the Bank of England has felt it necessary to raise interest rates. But I think these interest rates have gone too high. I don't think today's interest was justified, and I certainly don't think that the responsibility should have been handed over to the bank.
And had it not been the bank, you think it might be a bit lower, do you?
Well, I would certainly hope so. I don't know what decisions the Chancellor of the Exchequer would have made, but I certainly think that interest rates are higher than they need be.
Okay, Michael Green, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. My instinctive reaction about banks being put in control is that they shouldn't be, because I think the last thing they should be put in control of is money.
Okay.
But I do agree with the basic thrust of what's just been said. Okay. And I think that we also need to consider the fact that this is the Bank of England, and they are going to act not only in the interest of the country, but in the interest of the banking industry, and banks have to make a profit.
Harriet Harman?
Well, I think it's right that we move to give the Bank of England more independence over the decision about interest rates. I think that the evidence over the past few decades is that interest rates need to be taken on economic grounds. They need to be taken because they're important to the economy, not just for the immediate term, but for the longer term. And I think the temptation always has been there for politicians to take a short-term view. And just as Michael Howard has evidenced now, and this is certainly what happened with Kenneth Clarke in the past, taking a short-term view, ducking the difficult decisions. And if you give there to be a measure of independence, then those decisions can be taken on economic grounds for the longer term. And those economies where they've got more independence in the decision-making about interest rates have been more stable and more secure, and there's been more confidence in them. So I think that, of course, it's going to be hard for people. People do find it difficult when interest rates go up, but they find it even harder if there's boom and bust and instability in the economy, and they don't just have to pay a bit extra on their mortgage, they actually lose their home because their business goes bust and they lose their job.
But what if you think, as a government, that the bank has got it wrong?
Well, I think you can always second-guess the decision when you've actually given a measure of independence. But I think that if you've given that independence, you have to accept it. And I think that the right decision was made and we should accept it.
The man at the back there.
I think there has to be a proper balance between taxes and interest rates. And if you leave the Treasury looking after taxation and the Bank of England looking after interest rates, you get everything out of order. And the considerable damage is being done to the British economy now. Interest rates are going up, sterling's going up, and the whole manufacturing sector is being very savaged, very severely savaged. So I mean, everything's out of order.
And your prescription would be what?
Well, I mean, I think
taxation.
I think possibly tax should have been adjusted. I mean, one of the problems at the moment is that house prices are just in the southeast of England are booming, and that's causing the whole economy to get out of order. And of course, interest rates are subsidised by tax cuts. I mean, that's one thing that's out of order. But it is very serious, the damage which is being done to the whole of the British manufacturing sector.
Okay. Menzies Campbell.
Well, I agree with quite a lot of what's been said in the last moment or two. The difficulty here is that there's a direct relationship between monetary policy, interest rates, and fiscal policy, that's taxation. And the problem is that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has said, rightly, that the Bank of England should be independent in setting interest rates, but he said that he's not prepared to make any serious changes to the present rate of tax. And as a consequence, you've got a boom in the consumer economy, which is causing the economy in general to overheat. But you've got virtually a recession in the manufacturing economy because of the strength of the pound. And indeed, agriculture is suffering particularly because of the consequences that has for the green pound. And if we're going to get this into balance, we've got to be prepared to use both of these weapons, both monetary policy and fiscal policy.
What's your prescription going to be?
Well,
lower interest rates and higher taxation?
Well, I think you will get lower interest rates if you make it clear that you intend, as soon as is possible, to join the single European currency. One of the reasons why the pound is so high is because there's still uncertainty as to whether or not Britain will join the single European currency. And our interest rates are much higher than those countries which have already made that declaration.
And on tax, no change?
On tax, I think you have to judge where you think the balance of advantage lies. But if, like us, you argue there should be greater investment in health and education, and one of the ways you may better be able to do that is by raising more taxes, then here you can, as it were, get two for the price of one. You can help to reduce the value of an overinflated pound, and you can also find the means by which to reduce waiting lists and to provide more teachers in the classroom.
The woman in the blue jacket there.
Yeah, going back to Mr. Howard, he said that he thinks it's the responsibility of the government to control the currency. Do you think the German government is irresponsible in trusting the Bundesbank?
I think that in our system, government should be accountable to Parliament for those decisions. I think that is why we elect governments, and I think they should be accountable to Parliament. And that is one of the reasons why I think decisions should be taken in this country, in the interests of this country, and really there's no link at all between our interest rates, contrary to what Ming Campbell has said, and what's happening in Europe at the moment. The very fact that our interest rates are so much higher than interest rates on the continent of Europe is an indication of how our economy is operating to a different cycle, is not in sync with the economies on the continent of Europe, which is one of the reasons why it would be such a mistake for us to join the single currency.
B. Campbell.
I think broadly that it's right that these powers and functions are separated. However, in the end, we can't escape from the politics of the problem. And you've alluded to the difficulty that the Chancellor has because he's stuck in a kind of straitjacket of his own making vis-à-vis taxation, vis-à-vis a whole swathe of economic strategies. And we have a massive, enduring, chronic problem in Britain, which is our long-term relationship to investment and the short-termism of British economic strategies of both governments, actually, as it happens, and certainly of our financial institutions. So I don't know that the critical thing is the separation or not of the Bank of England from the government, but it is about a kind of a tradition in Britain in relation both now to taxation and economic investment.
The man in the second row here.
So members of the panellists are talking as though the bank is wholly independent, whereas the fact is that out of the 9 members of the panel, 4 are appointed by the government. Right. According to the minutes which are published, all 4, every single meeting, vote for an increase in interest rates. Surely if the government didn't agree, they could just replace some of those members of the panel.
Harriet Harman?
Well, that's why I said a measure of independence. I mean, obviously there is the question of appointments, but I think the difficulty with interest rates, if you don't take the hard decisions early enough, because you're looking over your shoulder and hoping things will brighten up, so you don't take what might be in immediate terms a difficult decision, you end up having to put interest rates up much higher later on when things have gone wrong. And that's why we ended up in 1990 with interest rates at 15%, and long-term interest rates are now coming down. And it's precisely because Gordon Brown wants to address the issue of long-term investment and long-term stability that's needed for that long-term investment, that he's taken this very bold move of actually divesting himself of some of that quick and easy power in the interests of the long term. And I think broadly it's been welcomed. It's not all easy. We've got deep-rooted fundamental economic problems in this country, but I think this is part of the solution.
You seem to be saying that if the 4 government-appointed members of the committee take the wrong decisions, you'll replace them. Is that what you were saying?
No, not at all. I don't think there's any intention. Well, there's no intention
You
for
said
this to be
partial independence.
Well, I said a measure of independence because
Do they do your bidding, is what I mean?
no, they're independent, but some of them are appointed. Is the point that I'm trying
So
to make?
So they can be sacked.
Well, you know, they come up for reappointment. I don't know what the exact details are, but the point is they do act independently, obviously. There's no intention. If Gordon wanted to keep control of interest rates, he wouldn't have actually given it over to the Bank of England. I don't think anybody seriously suggested that this is a smokescreen. But it does mean there will be difficult decisions, but they'll be taken at the right time, and in the longer term it will be better. We can't go back to the situation of boom and bust where thousands of businesses went bust. I mean, Michael Howard talks as if we've just moved out of a golden era of the economy. One of the reasons why the Tories lost the election.
You don't help long-term investment by savaging British exporters, by doing great damage to British farmers, by clobbering homeowners. An average £50,000 mortgage holder is going to pay an extra £65 a month on their mortgage as a result of the interest changes that have taken place since the election. Doing all those things is not actually going to help long-term investment in this country at all.
Okay, we'll go on to another question because we've taken some time on that. We must move on. Let's go on to the next question from Jane Barnby, who is a secretary. Jane Barnby.
I was just wondering, why is Gaza being treated as a modern-day hero or martyr who takes front page priority over all the other serious events of the week?
B. Campbell.
What can you say in answer to such a question? However, there has to be an answer. I think what's very interesting about the Gaza phenomenon is that he's at the centre of issues that we're all very interested in, primarily, actually, how men behave. And and of course, the tragedy of this man is that he belongs to this extraordinary, powerful, rich business, football, and the very moment when he was revealed, really, as a catastrophic man after he battered his wife, do you remember those terrible pictures of this wounded woman? The boss, Hoddle, says, I'll take care of business, I'll sort out this man. And we all...
Take your hand
Give us a chance.
You're taking on a pretty big job.
And of course, that was both grandiose and useless. He hasn't sorted out this man. And what I think is being revealed here is that there's a culture surrounding this poor bloke who's spilling his emotions all over the place, often violently, often drunk. Is that his best friends, who are laddish and loaded, are no use at all. The football manager of England is no use at all, despite his grandiose proclamations. Who's to blame for this? Surely, you know, it's clear it's not his mother, who I imagine did her best. So I think there's a serious conversation at stake about football culture and masculinity.
Okay. The man on the left-hand side there. Do you agree with this attack on...
Well, actually, I was going to make the point, isn't the ability to cry at will and spill one's emotions a very feminine trait?
Well, the trouble is that, I think many men are well used to crying. In this instance, you see, it's not just that he cries, it's that he fouls, he has tantrums on and off the field, he beats up the woman that he's supposed to love. I mean, this man is in a very serious state, and all of the blokes around him haven't been any use at all in clarifying what exactly his problem is.
Okay. Menzies Campbell, do you agree with that?
Well, I mean, what's interesting about this man is he's all of these things, you're quite right. But when he was at his peak, in his pomp, as I think they say in Yorkshire, he was probably the finest footballer in the world. He had a remarkable skill and extraordinary capacity, and he had an amazing relationship with the people who came to watch him. Now, 30 years ago, we'd never have known any of these things about him except his ability on the football field. Now, remember, my great boyhood hero was Dennis Compton, And on the day of a test match beginning, it's worth remembering, Dennis Compton used to turn up sometimes 10:30 in the morning, still in his dinner jacket, because he hadn't actually been to bed, and go out and score 100. And we never knew about any of these things, and all we knew was the achievement, the sporting achievement. And I think what's happened to Gaza is that he has become part of this extraordinary focus on the private lives of people who are in the public eye. But he's also a victim of the fact that sport is now so professional and demands such high standards that the kind of cavalier behaviour that people once got away with is no longer appropriate.
He nearly did. Hold on a second. Had he been 10% fitter, actually, Hoddle would have had him in the team. You must be joking. They were desperate to have him in the team.
Well, but you see,
yes,
but